Great. Well, welcome everyone. This is the first meeting of the Elementary School Reuse Committee. And so we're going to record this meeting and make it available to people for viewing after the meeting is over. I will be creating a web page for the project. So it'll be in the planning department under the elementary school reuse section, and that will be where we post information and make these videos available, and other people can follow along on our progress as we go. So I think with that, I want to hand it over to the city's consultant for this project, Emily Inez. No, sorry, no, I knew it. I was going to practice it and everything. Emily will introduce herself, and then we'll do a quick round of introductions, and Emily will give us a presentation, and then we'll have time for some questions, and we'll set up for the next meeting, which I do want to say at the beginning here is going to be on October 13th, which is a Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. So that'll be the next time that this group convenes. So I think maybe with that, Emily, if you're okay, Emily will cover a lot of this, but we've started this project a while back. And so wherever Emily's presentation drops off at the end, if there's anything else that, I want to add as the planner, we can add it then. But, everyone has been kind of appointed to sit on this committee by the mayor, and I think we're kicking off. So this is the first meeting. So I guess with that, Emily, maybe you want to take it away and you can go through your presentation.
Yep, happy to. So I'm excited to be here tonight. My name is Emily Ennis from Ennis Associates, and as Jeff mentioned, I'm the planner that's assisting the city with this overall process. And so we're going to be talking today about that process, about how we're developing an RFP for the reuse of the schools. You guys are an integral part of that. So looking forward to kind of introducing you to where we are, getting initial questions from you, and then our next meeting, we're really going to plunge in and start working. So this is an introductory piece. With that, I'm going to share my screen and take you through the initial parts of our discussion. So let me just open the other window back up so I can see you all again. This is obviously our first meeting. We'll have a couple throughout the process. I'll have you introduce yourselves next, so I can find out who you are and what we can start the working together. Talk a little bit about why we're just doing a disposition of the schools and what that means, the goals for this process, the overall process and timeline. You have homework to do. So we can get prepped for the next meeting, and then we'll talk a little bit about the next meeting. So with that, why don't we have it handily? We have your names up here, so we just go in order of the names on here, put them in alphabetical order because it makes it a little bit easier. So Lauren, do you want to start us off?
Sure. My name is Lauren Clark, and I'm a relative newcomer to Easthampton. I've been here for about 4.5 years. I started coming out to this area a few years before that when I helped start an arts and culture magazine called Take, which was relatively short-lived, but well done. And hopefully, some of the cultural things that we covered in that magazine will probably be germane to the cultural discussion of these city plans. I right now work I do the marketing for a small wine and spirits importer that's actually based in Minnesota. Where the employees of this company, which is called House Alpens, are scattered around the country. I am basically the one-person marketing department. And that's kind of just, my day job. Otherwise, I like to consume the culture around this area when it's functioning and open, which I hope will be soon. But I'm really happy to be living in the city, and I use the bike path a lot. I've met a lot of the other residents pretty quickly, and just enjoy the quality of life here and kind of just seeing the trajectory. So I appreciate being on this committee.
Well, welcome. I think, it sounds like your background, you will have a lot to offer to this committee and bring an interesting perspective and unique perspective. So that's great. Glad to have you a part of it.
Thanks.
Chris, I think you're next.
Yep, thanks. That's a tough act to follow. I'm Chris Korchak. I'm a used book dealer in town. I operate mostly online. I've been connected to these schools somehow since the new school vote, then through the downtown strategic planning, and now this. And I'm very excited to implement what we learned in this downtown planning. I've been in town for, I think, 8 years on EDIC and various other committees. I'm excited to do this.
Excellent. Yes. And your experience working with the previous plan, I think will be really helpful. So welcome. Pamela.
Hi, I'm Pamela Means. I'm Pamela Means. I'm a full-time musician. I live in Easthampton. I am a renter and I hope to be a homeowner in Easthampton. And I'm also involved with Luthier's Co-op, a gym in town on Cottage Street, and I do sound there. The mayor asked me several months ago if I would be on a committee, and I said yes, having no idea what it would be. And so I feel honored to be part of this committee and this particularly small group for such an important thing to discuss. And also I am a queer, biracial, and politically radical. And so I love living in Easthampton, and I choose to live here because it's a place where I can be all the different parts of myself with very little hassle. I live here pretty comfortably emotionally, and that's why I would like for it to stay my home. And so I feel, again, grateful to be part of this committee and this discussion for the town going forward.
Well, we're very glad to have you. And yes, bring all of those selves to the conversation. I think that'll be fantastic. So welcome. Brad.
Hey, everybody. I'm Brad Riley. I know a few of you already know who I am, but for those of you that don't, I've been a resident in Easthampton now for 10 years. So I've definitely seen a lot of the economic and cultural growth that's gone on in the last decade. So I feel like I have a pretty good pulse of, where we've been and the trajectory that we've been on. For the last 2 years, I've been serving on the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership here in Easthampton. And in that role, I bring in, almost 2 decades of transitional housing experience for survivors of sexual and domestic violence, at-risk youth, folks with addiction co-occurring with mental health disorders. So, I definitely have an eye towards promoting public health and alleviating poverty. So those are the kinds of things that I'm going to be bringing to the committee, but I'm absolutely open to all perspectives. And like everybody else said, I look forward to learning from everyone and getting to work.
Well, housing and housing challenges are certainly going to be part of the discussion. So that's great. Delighted to have you on board. Zoe, do you want to introduce yourself? And then I think, Mayor, you can take over and after that. So Zoe?
Hi, I'm Zoe. I work in the building department. I've worked in the mayor's office for the city, and I take minutes for the planning board as well. And so Jeff recruited me to take minutes for this, and happy to be able to listen in, especially since it should connect to my work in the building department. So,
great.
Thank you.
Very glad to have you as part of this, Zoe.
Can I say something? So real quick too, this is a great round of introductions and I really appreciate it. There are a couple of members who were unable to make it. So Pat Broff is on the list here. And so Pat is on the Council on Aging, and he also sits on the school building committee, which is kind of the other end of this, which is the committee that's building the new school. And so Pat's bringing kind of those elements to the table. There's the representing the Council on Aging, and then sort of these technical steps and processes associated with building the new school. Tracy Harris, he is on the historical commission. So the idea with some of the members is to bring these people to the table. So we have a member from the historical commission, Chris is on the economic development committee, and Brad is on the housing partnership. So we wanted the representation from those groups to be at the table. And Joe McCoy is our former city council president who, in theory will be running this meeting as the chair. As we get farther along, I think it'll be more important to have kind of that chair representation. And so Joe, brings to the table all the experience from being the president of city council. So bringing this process, which will ultimately be really technical, through, he'll be kind of leading this group through that. But those people weren't able to make it tonight. So I think with that, maybe Mayor LaChapelle, you can say a few words, and then we'll kick it off to Emily's presentation.
Great, thank you all. Emily, can we take the slide down for at least a little bit
Yep, absolutely.
so we can see each other?
Yep.
That'd be great.
I forget I have it on gallery view, so I forget
Yeah.
not everybody does that. Thank you for the reminder.
I don't even know how to do that. Yeah, so as I was listening, I'm sorry I was a little bit late, but listening to everybody introduce themselves and their experiences and why willing to serve, but just who everyone is affirmed my thought about pulling this particular group together. It's not often that decisions about important stuff like this are affirmed in my own mind, so I'm feeling pretty good tonight. But that said, everybody on this call, one way or another, is thinking pretty hard about housing and also affordability in Easthampton and preserving the quirkiness and the, whatever you want to call it, the emotional safe space. I think that Pamela bringing that up is, that's really the bedrock of so many things when we're talking about culture and housing and whatnot. And these three schools that, the reuse are really super important. I mean, this is, multi-generational set of decisions this group with others will be making about what this, requests for proposals look like for these three schools. And I think it's very easy to be presented with this kind of work and think about what's going on right now, right? So like we need more restaurant space, we need, co-working space and whatnot. But with the perspectives that are in this group, there's buy-in for that generation. So what Easthampton is looking like or needing in 2026 is going to be dramatically different than what we're looking at now. And working with Emily as a consultant and Jeff, and we've got some data from Downtown Strategy Plan and EDIC. It's pulling that together and really starting with this group, making the compelling case of that we truly need to look far ahead. And not so, maybe what the decision today doesn't completely jive with conventional wisdom, but it'll be this group that's looking at material and having discussions that are very broad about why, the solution for today won't be the solution in 10 years. I also was, super passionate about downtown, living downtown, regardless of your age or mobility, and the schools for us are, again, they're a game changer. And I rely on all of you to keep that in mind, because we don't, people are like, oh, you're the new Northampton, or you could be like, what, and it's like, it comes down to one clear statement, is Easthampton. and we're defining it. And Easthampton is no other place in the world. We happen to be the best place in the world, but no other place in the world. And the quirkiness or the just the zaniness that doesn't seem to make sense actually makes all of us find a space in Easthampton. We want to preserve that. So when we're looking at these schools, one great example is, and I'm already starting to get pushback, is like, we need to put these 3 schools or the schools and get them back on the tax roll, and I really could give 2 flying bumps about that. I think it's about the best use. It's not about the best commercial use. And quite honestly, even I can't think of a totally commercial use for these schools that would augment the quality of life for most of the city in even 3 years, never mind 30 years. So I just want to be clear. I certainly don't have an answer or something I'm hoping that you all will suggest and work through. But I also want you to know that the benefits of this, certainly they're economic, and, we could go through that. But it's also quality of life, for everybody and generations, but just, somebody who has found, enjoyment here. And they want to live here, or they did live here and they needed to move or whatnot. So that's, very excited about the concept of a reuse committee. I do think that there are a great range of perspectives on this and other city work that people have done. And Jeff has, and actually Emily from past work, have put a great deal of thought, and we have a lot of data and a lot of forecasting of what will look like as a city going forward. So I'm excited, and I also feel strongly that the work of this group, just to talk kind of municipal government structure, I don't want to surprise anybody. The final request for proposals that we put out, for people to bid on what they want to do, right? So I don't want to get too technical, but the bottom line is, you will come out with a work product that then I need to take to city council, and they actually get to weigh in on that RFP. We've done something like this in the past, and it's been pretty disastrous. And we've literally snipped our nose off in front of ourselves. I'm looking not to go to city council with that recommendation alone. I want to be able to say, like, look, you're not saying yes or no to me, and you're not slipping in this language because you're the city council. Like, you're basically ignoring your constituents that, it was a very inclusionary group, and this is what they're seeing. So there's an accountability to such a big decision, really, to our city residents. And I know each one of you during this process will be talking to your own social circle or workers or, colleagues to say, what do you think about this? And I'm very excited and very grateful for that kind of thinking and conversation, and really going to the legislative branch of government with a very holistic set of ideas and structures of how we look at the projects. I will wrap it up and also say we're working on some folks coming to town that fund these projects, or developers work with to fund different mixed-use commercial and affordable housing and first-time buyer condos. And, without putting a burden or expectation on any of you here, when those meetings happen, you certainly will get invitations. So you can kind of hear the process from the Boston point of view, but more importantly, for the Boston folks to hear that we're behind this. Like, we don't know what it's going to be, but like, we're going to come forward with a very holistic community-based solution, and like, prick your ears up now, because we're coming back for money. And the money, we want to fund our ideas and not some cookie cutter. And right now, there's a tremendous opportunity, and Emily will talk to you about this, about actually being able to do those kind of projects in a new way that usually Boston doesn't do. So again, thank you all for your time and working on this. And I'm just super grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate hearing from you at the beginning of this. We're going to have quite a conversation over the next few months, and you really set the stage for that. Let me go back. So you should all be able to see the screen again. This is really coming out of a previous planning process. The mayor mentioned it already, the downtown strategic plan, and hopefully you've had a chance to skim through it. We're going to kick off by working through from this a little bit. But the purpose of the disposition is to start thinking about how the schools can fulfill some of those objectives, and figure out how they can be redeveloped, how buildings and site can be redeveloped to contribute to the overall revitalization of the downtown. And housing options was a big part of that. It's certainly a community conversation throughout Massachusetts, is how to increase the variety of housing options, the affordability of housing options. And so that's certainly going to be part of the conversation. But something else that came out of this conversation, we did have multiple opportunities for the public to weigh in. So a one-day series of stakeholder interviews, people who have a specific understanding of the area and the downtown, 3 separate community workshops, and then there was the sounding board who also weighed in. And this was really important for the schools in addition to the entire downtown, because there were conversations about which uses the community wanted to see school by school. And so we've got the 3 up here, and obviously, Jeff, I'll give this to you at the end of the meeting, and you can send it out with the homework. So we don't have to read through them every day, but just to, or each one of them today, but just to set it up so you see the structure is a series of desired uses and whether they're public, private, or nonprofit uses. So that gets into how the schools might be used. And then part of our discussion is going to be how do we take what we've heard from the original public meetings and work those into something that a developer can respond to in an RFP. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Center actually had the most variety of uses suggested for it. And I do want to stress that it's building as well as site, because some of the things that we're looking at are site options, parking or neighborhood playgrounds or something like that. So it's really 3-dimensional thinking for us now. What uses could go where potentially, how we think about those uses and how we prioritize those uses. And that's going to be important as we move into the discussion of how we structure the RFP. So our goal as a committee is to develop the requests for proposals for the reuse of all 3 schools. And one of the things that we can talk about in the structure is whether or not we're requiring that it be responding, the response be for all 3 schools, or whether or not we're going to say you could do 2 and 1 or each individually 1. There's pros and cons about that. So that will be a discussion. We also need to develop as a committee the reuse criteria for each school. And so what that is a section of the RFP where we say, when you come in, we would like you to, this is the criteria, you must do the following, and whatever that following is. And so that's going to be the first part of our conversation. And then the second part is going to be the evaluation criteria. And that piece is going to be, we're going to give you a higher score if you're able to do X. And so one of the things that we'll need to be talking about over the next couple of months is what is a must do? What is the thing that absolutely has to happen? And what is the thing that's an advantage if a developer can do that? And so we'll have conversations. There's a lot of data out there. Jeff can talk a little bit more about some of the other things that are going on to collect more data. But the idea is, given the physical constraints, given the environmental constraints, given the market constraints, how do we say, okay, these things are non-negotiable, we have to have them happen? And how do we say these things we're flexible on, but we have specific preferences for that? And so we'll be developing those and working back and forth to talk about that. There are, of course, other parts of the RFP. It's going to be, what's the information that we give them? How do we set up site walks? So there's a lot of technical pieces, but that's the key piece that this committee needs to be thinking about, is the reuse criteria and the evaluation. So I mentioned that there's some other information being collected. We've been doing some work already, and this is where your homework will come in. The first part was to do a memorandum of the disposition process to really lay out how this works, and also do some precedent research and best practices. That's actually continuing a little bit with the summer holidays and people just generally being busy. I've been researching what other communities have already done for an RFP, specifically for schools. And now I'm talking with communities rather individually to find out how those processes went and what would they do differently if they were reissuing the RFP. And in some cases, they have reissued the RFP. And so learning from what other communities have done in the past. So that's going on a little bit. At the same time, we're doing an analysis of the existing conditions. So I had a site walk with Jeff and members of Valley CDC, and Jeff, I'll let you talk a little bit about that as well, going through the schools to see that the condition they're in now, starting to gather photographs that we can put in the RFP so that the potential developers, when they do their site walk and evaluation, will have that information. We're also hoping to get a more detailed evaluation. That's the grant that Jeff mentioned earlier, the Community One-Stop Grant, to get a more detailed assessment of the condition of the buildings. And that will be important. In fact, one of the communities I spoke to will at some point reissue their RFP after doing a hazmat study, because they didn't have that information when they first went out. Then all of that information starts to come together as we start talking about the reuse restrictions in October and December. So you're starting in task 4, as some of these other pieces are parallel. Starting in January, after we've had a chance to discuss through the reuse restrictions, the criteria, we'll start actually putting the draft together and going back and forth on that. And then putting those other pieces that I mentioned in there, and then going to City Council, as the mayor said, probably in May, having that issued. We're trying to time it for when the schools will be finishing up, coming offline. Those buildings will be available for site walks for developers. So there's a little bit of flexibility going on here, but we're trying to keep it as close to the schools process as we can. So when those schools are available for redevelopment, the RFP is already out, and we're looking at actually having somebody in place. So with that, I'll go over the homework that you'll have. If you haven't read it yet, the Downtown Strategic Plan, especially Chapter 5, which is about the schools, will provide you with a draft of the memorandum of the disposition process, the memorandum of the disposition process is done. It's a draft white paper on the precedents, and that's just because I'm still having the conversations. But you'll at least get to see the initial research and how a lot of these pieces flow together. That includes not only the Downtown Strategic Plan, but also your housing production plan. Information from that will be feeding into this as well. And then pages 57 to 63 of the strategic plan and 7 to 13 of the white paper are the initial criteria that we're going to discuss on October 13th. They start looking like this. And this came out of the strategic plan. It was initial weighting of the criteria. On the other hand, the strategic plan was finished off last year, right before COVID hit and we all went into lockdown. And so what we'll want to do is review the weightings and see, has anything changed based on what we know now, based on conversations post the strategic plan being finished. And then again, what are these moved to a must-have? What are these moved to we'd like to have? So that's the presentation from tonight. I'm happy to jump back to anything. Jeff, I don't know if you want to add anything more about the other work that's going on.
Yeah, if you know, I think it would be good if I could just kind of briefly do that. It goes back, I think Chris mentioned it, but, we go back to 2018, and there was, the initiative to put forward the debt exclusion override question to Easthampton residents. And so, in May, that happened in May of 2018, and, seeing that coming was my sort of call to action on this. And it was right in that time frame that I started to put together this grant request to do the downtown strategic plan. It started out as we're going to need to start addressing what to do with these schools like immediately. And I think I realized that we couldn't do that in a vacuum. So we made it pretty broad, and we looked at the whole downtown. So we looked at Cottage Street, Union Street, and Main Street just as a whole. And so we wanted to make sure we didn't do it in a vacuum. And so we got a $50,000 grant from the state. And we added some funds to that to hire Harriman Associates, and they came and they were in town for a while. And that's the plan that, is really the foundation for this. And that really took us, that was the preliminary look, and we gathered the public input. So we left that off knowing that we gathered a lot of public input. We have a lot of ideas. We have a good sense of what people would love to see happen there. And I think that's really important. And as we go forward, it's really going to be testing those and finding out what will be realistic. And it's going to be a technical process, but that we've really laid the groundwork for that in the downtown plan. Meanwhile, we also did the housing production plan. So what that is it's the city's, it's required. So every 7 years, municipalities are asked to come up with a plan to produce more affordable housing. So we did that last year. And through that process, the schools were kind of integrated into that because it is an opportunity for us to build more affordable housing. So it's a kind of a key strategy in there. A little bit of a sidebar was another plan that we did was the open space and recreation plan. So while you might think of trails on Mount Tom or the rail trail, those are really important assets for us. But pocket parks and getting access to playgrounds in the downtown area is embedded in that plan too. So all of that work has been ongoing to support this process, and it doesn't stop there. So I have another grant. So we've been getting a lot of grants, and the narrative is really important. And so I did provide the grant application that we have now pending with the state. It's the One Stop for Growth. And so the state retooled how they want communities to look at projects. And they're really asking communities to look at your site or your whatever you're looking for, a development, and put it onto a development continuum. And it starts with gathering community input and community support. It looks at making sure your zoning is correct to allow these uses to occur. And then it gets into this area of due diligence. So without getting too technical, whatever we do, whoever's looking at these properties, a developer, and we have to acknowledge that we will be thinking about what developers do to buy a property or build out. They'll need to do certain things. And so Emily mentioned the hazmat. It's called an environmental assessment of the buildings, and it's a phase 1. And so part of this grant application that we have out now is for us, the city, to pay someone to do that environmental testing of the buildings over the next couple of months, so that the committee knows if there's asbestos or any other kind of hazardous materials in there. We'll all know, and the developers will know, because that would be the first thing they'd have to come in and do is they'd say, well, okay, well, we have to test them for environmental stuff, and that creates questions in their end. A few other things we're going to do is architectural assessments. So some of this, Maple Street in particular has been done, but we don't know the condition of Center or Pepin. So, there's things for building code. There's requirements for earthquakes that get considered now when you're looking at an older building. And so we're going to have those assessments done as baseline information. And then, it comes down to even a survey of the property. Where are the boundaries? They produce a map that shows where the buildings are, where the playground is, and we don't have any of that. And so all of those things would be necessary for any developer to come and really seriously look at the schools. So we asked for $100,000 from the state to do this due diligence at all 3 sites. And we will be hearing about that hopefully by the end of October. And that'll really feed us information that we don't have over the next several months. Also kind of related to this, we have used CPA funds to pay Valley CDC to help us evaluate the buildings for affordable housing. And so their area of expertise is looking at, what kind of tax credits would a developer want to have access to bring units into the existing buildings. And they're also going to be looking at what kind of tax credits would be available if there were no building there, because there's 2 different kind of funding sources that an affordable housing developer will potentially access. And so Valley CDC will help us kind of run some numbers on the building size, the site size, and we really want to go in. I think the mayor alluded to past projects kind of having, some pitfalls. These are a lot of the pitfalls we're trying to clarify as early as possible. So it's a lot of technical things, but all this is to lay out all this information for the committee. It'll be all publicly available on the webpage that we build out. It'll be available for future, reference to when it gets to city council. And then when we release the RFPs, all this information and data that we've gathered will be available for potential developers to look at. And so we're just trying to make this as predictable as possible and give as much information as we can, because I think over and over again, as we go through this conversation, the lack of information or, not having that, that'll diminish the likelihood that we can understand or get a development that we as a community want in the school. So that's a lot of, it sounds a lot jargony, but we will talk through a lot of that stuff as we go. And then there is one more thing I had in my notes here I want to mention is over the next few months, we will have interaction with the school department. It's very technical and it's in the disposition. So that's just a fancy word for getting, we're going to get rid of these buildings to someone. So that's disposition. The school department has some work to do and I guess their technical term is a purge plan. So they're beginning, if you don't know, they're beginning to get ready to move some students over to the new school. So in January, students at Whitebrook, the existing middle school, will move into the new school, and then they'll start the process of getting materials out of the elementary schools. So the students at the elementary schools will end in the end of June, and that'll be the last time that students will set foot in that building. But there will be this period of time over next summer that the school department will be emptying those buildings. And so that's their purge plan. And so we want to weave this timeline through so that we can be ready for when the schools are empty. And Emily alluded to that. So that's about all I have right now. But the downtown plan is really critical to just get a sense of, if you really wanted to, it's not required, but there are recordings of the community meetings. So if it comes up later and that seems important, I'll dig in them and we can find information from that. The One Stop for Growth, why I'm harped on that is because we have this narrative that we've built about the importance of the schools and how it relates to what Easthampton is right now. And a lot of people think that the grants are just given out. And we've been working really, really hard to make our narrative compelling. We're trying to show that we're trying to access state funds. We're doing what the state's asking for. So one of the biggest things the state's asking for is affordable housing and housing in general. It's a huge need across Massachusetts. So we're aligning our projects to respond to that while also doing what we need to do for Easthampton, which, the bottom line is as much affordable housing as we could ever develop, we need it. So that's kind of just the mantra that we're going to have in this narrative, is that we're trying really hard to make this happen. So I think with that, I'll stop. Emily, I don't know if questions would be good now or anything. And I think, we talked about getting some information after the meeting. We didn't want to like drop all this information on you to expect you to read it before the meeting. So we'll kind of, tomorrow or Friday, we'll send it out and you can start to review some of it in like a logical order. So Emily,
an introduction would be much better. But yes, Jeff, I think having questions or comments right now would be perfect. If any of you have anything to ask based on what you've heard so far, or concerns or anything, love to hear them now.
And if not, that's okay.
Yes.
That's okay too.
I just have a quick comment. I thank you for the the sort of synopsis of what has, of sort of the foundation that has been laid, I guess, as you said. I didn't really realize how much affordable housing was a part of what is desired here and what has been talked about. So that's wonderful. It seems like that's, the anchor of this whole discussion in a way.
It's certainly been a huge component of it. In looking at the criteria, there are obviously other things that people want to see, and that's that balance that I was alluding to, is what's possible. Funding obviously is an issue, but I think Jeff's point on making the compelling case, taking the narrative from the one stop, reworking a lot of that, but making a compelling case to a developer that Easthampton is a place that they would like to come and do this work, that is attractive to them, and that there's openness to a bunch of different ideas, I think is also important. Developers do want to do good work. They want to have a project that they can be proud of. They want to work in communities that welcome them. So setting up the criteria in such a way that they have a clear understanding of the expectation, providing the information they need to do the due diligence in advance, will go a long way to getting developers that are responsive to the type of community that Easthampton is. And one of the things that we can collectively be doing over this process is looking to see who's doing the type of work that would be attractive to the Easthampton community, because although an RFP obviously goes out for public distribution, there's nothing wrong with sending it, keeping track of who you send it to make sure that, developers that you think might be interested actually see it. So that's something as well. And there's a whole procurement process, and Easthampton is lucky that they have a procurement officer, Michael Owens, who's helping us out with this project and staying, in very close touch to make sure that we're doing all the technical dotting of I's and crossing of T's that we need to do for this process. So, yeah.
Brad.
Yeah, so this is just probably more for my own information to prepare. So I've only done a process before of developing an RFP and kind of seeing it through. That was to contract with another organization to do work on behalf of the city. So I recognize that RFPs essentially serve the same purpose. This one seems far more complex and detailed than the one that I've worked on. So I don't know if either of you know of like a good resource on how to create effective RFPs, if there's like a textbook or if there's like an organization that helps with skill sets, anything like that that could help me along the process, I would appreciate.
Yeah, I'll be happy to have a look and see if I see that resource. I think too, having a look at the white paper that goes through some of the recent ones that have been issued, and I can also provide you. I've been downloading them, so I can also provide you with copies of the recent ones. By the time we next meet, I should also have talked with those communities about whether or not they actually worked. So,
Okay.
and to that point, I should say that not only is Michael Owens working with us, but City Council will also be, because an RFP has legal implications as well. So we will have City Council looking over our shoulders too, again, to make sure that it's appropriately developed.
And you mean the city attorney, right? So
Sorry, city attorney. I forget council. Yep. Council with a C versus council with an S. Yes, city attorney.
Yeah, no, Brad, I think it's a good question. I think the first version that you'll see is the white paper that Emily's been putting together, and you hopefully will find some comfort to know that the disposition of elementary schools is actually more common than you would think. So the list of 6 that are in the white paper, I think it'll help shed light on the process. And if Emily is able to get the RFPs, that will be really meaningful. And, not to put too fine a point on it, but I think when we get down into this a little bit more and it really into the details, like the you musts, that like the things that we decide, like you must do, that's where we really want to just understand the implications of cementing that as a requirement. And that's, the general notion is that more flexibility will be better. And it's the degree to how much flexibility do we want to give someone in responding? And so that's going to take a couple months to get to that, to like a solution there, but that's one of them. One thing I did want to say is that built into the agenda, and we had a quick conversation with Joe McCoy, we will have public speak time at the end, because we felt like someone joining this out of curiosity should hear where we're at, because they can get update and information, and then at the end we can reserve time for anyone who would like to ask questions or say something. We have no one here now. It's not a closed process, but this is like a lot of work session types of things. So as we will put out some kind of information that the committee has met and the committee exists. But I think as you all, as the committee members, if you're encountering someone who's giving you information and wants to talk about it, you should try to direct them to the meeting or the website, at least initially, and then we can go from there and find out what someone's interested in learning about or has comments on. We just don't feel like we need to go back to the whole public process right now, because we're kind of at this stage. And I guess what I am dancing around is there will be this public discussion now, and there'll be a product, and the product is really what, that's what people will really want to review, and that will be what happens at City Council. So I just want everyone to know that there'll be kind of this conversation going on through the next couple of months, and then there'll be a City Council, there'll be at least 2 meetings of City Council where community members can weigh in and understand what before it goes out, what is happening. So it's not a community meeting type process, but there is this committee, and then there will be a City Council review process. So if you encounter people along the way, if you encourage them to come to the meeting or check the website, and then just remind them that there'll be a City Council discussion at the end when there actually is a product. So I just wanted to kind of capture some of that.
Can I just piggyback on what Jeff was saying? Because I don't think he explicitly said it. The reason that we're not doing a public forum is because we did it. Like, we've done it all. We've gotten all the data. And so there's going to be a lot of people who are coming with ideas, and we did that already. And so I think getting bogged down by that will be pretty bad, if pretty detrimental to the whole movement that we're trying to do.
Yep, and I do. If you're curious, and it's not like I'm not required, but if you're curious, there is an appendices. So there's the plan, and it's got a couple chapters, but then there's the appendices. And so I was just kind of thumbing through. We had the workshops, and that was a community-driven kind of process. And then we released the plan in draft form for a couple of weeks.
Right.
And you know, thumbing through, we cataloged all the comments, and they're all in the appendices. And so I think what Chris is saying, and I think what would be valuable is if someone feels like we missed something, you know, that would be good to figure out if we missed something, but we felt like we covered a lot. So that likelihood is pretty low that we really missed something that's not kind of like mentioned or encapsulated somehow. So that'll be the real thing that we want to listen for public comments on. And a lot of people, I think, will be wanting to understand the process. And once we get the materials out to you, we'll put them online too, so people can start to review that as well.
And it is, because it's the disposition of schools, it is a much more complex process than you might see for other things. So when you see the draft timeline in there and the disposition process, there's a lot of moving pieces. So part of my job is to keep us moving on the pieces that we need to move on, and then we may have to slow down if something's not coming in on time from one of the other pieces, or speed up for that matter. But we should, I think, the way it's structured now, Jeff and I and Mike spent quite a bit of time this spring trying to figure out how all these things work together. And I think we've got between the sort of the October to December discussions that we're going to have on the criteria, and then moving those into the draft plan, there'll still be a chance to revisit those if we need to. So I think we'll have plenty of time together to be able to do the work that needs to be done for this and turn out something that's really reflective of what the community has requested.
Yep. And I think we're close to the end, and I will offer, myself up. If you have questions, shoot me an email, and then we can find time. Like right now, it's been great because town hall has tents outside. I will make myself available if someone, because I can, even for me, and because I've been kind of working on this for a couple of months. It's kind of a big learning curve, so I can be available to anyone. We can schedule a time to just meet to go over questions. I want to do that. I think there'll be points in time when it'll be kind of really a high level of questions to figure out what's next or what does this mean. And I'm more than willing to be that kind of resource for the committee members. So that'll be good. Great. So barring any last minute questions, I think this was the purpose of the meeting. We wanted to kind of keep it to an hour and not give you too much heartburn or anything at the first meeting. I think my goal will be to try to get an email out to the group on Friday. And then, that would be a fine time in between now and the next meeting. If anyone has questions, I'll make myself available to just get us ready for October 13th. And then we'll go from there. I don't think we'll hear about that one stop for growth by that time, because they're saying like the end of October, but that's really going to kind of set me in motion. One other thing real quick was appraisals. So like the simple act of getting the schools appraised like that, and they cost, we have cost estimates for those. So that'll be something as soon as, my ideal is we get the funding. The mayor has committed to finding the funds in the event that we don't get the grant, because we've really rationalized like those pieces of due diligence are just going to be super critical. So it's going to be a parallel path for a while on those. And then the idea is that information will come to the committee before we finalize everything. And that's kind of like the ideal situation, is that everyone will have that information. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives us a chance to do one last check and say, okay, based on all the information that we have, is this still the right order and the right priority of everything? So that, again, there's no surprises when we go to City Council with the final draft. We're confident that all that information has been taken into account.
Great. All right. Well, I really appreciate everyone being here. The other folks are going to be asked to watch the recording so they can catch up. And then let me know if you have any questions, and we'll go forward and look forward to October 13th at 6 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you to both of you for putting so much effort into this already. It makes it much easier for us. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Good to know you all.
Good night.
That's great. Thank you all very much.